Alright, hey, what's up everybody? It's Developer X coming at you with another tutorial. This tutorial is on backend auth. We're going to use JSON Web Tokens and bcrypt to hash our passwords and build out a full authentication system for the backend. Included in this tutorial, we will be using something called Middleware and how to get set up and get going. The only thing I have done right here so far is that, hey guys, shh, hey, yeah, those are my dogs. That's my dogs. Okay, that's Albert, and that's Henry. Henry, what's up, Henry? Okay, and so we're going to create something starting brand new with auth example, and I'm just gonna show you there's nothing there. First thing I'm gonna do is do npm init. I should have just did -y, and we're just gonna hit basics on all of it. Then you'll see that I have a package.json file. We're gonna install our packages that we need, which we need to do npm install bcrypt, .js, JSON Web Token, Express, and let me see. Let me bring up the rest of my stuff. Express and Mongoose, because we're going to use MongoDB, and body parser. Alright, I think that's all of our dependencies this time around. Okay, so we're going to install all of those, and we're going to jump right into it. I'm not going to be using this that much. I'm going to be using my code editor from here on out, and I'm going to get that situated here. Okay, so we have this empty file here. The first things I want to do is create a couple of base files, like my server.js file. I'm going to create a new app file that's going to basically house everything, and I'm also going to create a config.js and a db.js. Okay, so I'm going to create all those. I know I'm also going to need an auth folder, and I'm going to create a users folder, a user folder. Okay, cool. Inside this users folder, I'm going to need a user model. So I'm going to create a user.js, and inside my authentication model, my authentication folder, I'm going to need an auth controller.js file, and I know I'm going to need something called middleware, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I'm going to call this verified token.js, and we'll see how it all comes together at the end. Okay. So the first things I want to do at this point is I want to put my app.js file together. Okay. So inside this file, I'm gonna basically create my server, right? My Express server. So I'm gonna do const express is equal to require express, and I'm also gonna do const app. You guys have all seen this before, which is gonna use express, and I'm gonna do something with my const.db, which is just gonna require my .db file. Okay. After that, I'm gonna bring in my const auth controller. Excuse me. My auth controller from auth.authController, and after that, I'm just going to create a quick API endpoint that I know is going to work with a request and a response, just so I can make sure I can test this. So I'm going to do the status of 200, and I'm going to do a .send of the API works. Okay. After I do that, I'm going to do an app.use. I'm going to use /API/auth, and I'm going to use the auth controller to take precedence there. Then I'm going to module.exports, which is just going to export that module app outside. Okay, I'm going to save that. So in order for us to get this to work, we have to do a few things. We have to get our DB working. We have to get our authentication, our auth controller working. And we have to bring it all together, right? So let's bring this all together at this point. The next thing I'm going to work on is I'm going to work on my server.file. And in this guy, all I'm going to do is just going to bring my const app, and I'm going to require my app file. Where is my app? My app file right there. And I'm going to define a port, which is going to be process.env.port. Or 3333. If you guys know me, I like to just start I like to use the base port of 3333. I don't know, it's just been a habit of mine. And I'm going to create a server, which is going to be app.listen, and it's going to be the port. And I'm going to pass in an anonymous function to make sure that our server is running, and it logs something else back out to say that it's running. Server is running on port. You know what? Let's use template literals here. So let's do backtick, and let's do some template literals here. Pass in the port, just like that. So that way we can see when the server is up and running once we pass that through. Okay, so now we got our server file, our app file created. Next thing I want to do is create my DB file. Okay, so my DB file here, since we're going to be using Mongo, we need to start, thinking about bringing in Mongoose. Mongoose is just like an ORM, similar like Connects, but uses Mongoose to create the database schemas, create the updates, and use everything in between for your MongoDB layer, rather than using like Connects or something, right? So here I'm going to require Mongoose, and we're going to, so in order to use an mlabs DB, which we're going to get into right here at this point, is we're going to create an mlabs DB, and I'm going to show you guys what's going on here. I've already created an instance here, but I'm going to go create a brand new one right in the beginning so we can see what's going on. I hit create new. Once I create a new one, I'm going to hit, any one of these will work. AWS is perfect. I'm going to hit continue here. I'm going to pick one of these guys. I'm going to hit continue, and we're going to call this auth example G101. And I'm going to hit continue there. Okay, get set up with the submit order. It's all free. We could all try it out there. Once I do that, I'm going to wait till it's created. I'm going to hit a quick refresh here, and I'm going to open this up, create a user, add database user. I'm going to create someone with developer X. I'm going to password these. I'm going to fake these out, and I am going to use a generated password here by secure password. There it is. You shouldn't be able to see this, but when you do, I'll make sure I comment that up. Okay, awesome. So now I created my own user on the database layer, and I am going to then look at this little URL here, and I am going to get set up with my database config here, right? So what I'm going to do, give me a second, let me get everything caught up here. Okay, so after I get my database layer set up, I'm going to grab that URL from that Mongoose library, and I am going to break it down into pieces. Okay, so here I go. I'm going to grab this URL here. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to bring in our example here. I'm going to paste that on top just so I have a good reference here, and then I'm going to break it down into how to build this. So the first thing I'm going to do is make the MongoDB URI. Okay, DB URI. Now this is just going to be this code here minus the DB user and the DB password. So if you guys look at this example, you'll see that it's the username that you created and then the password that you created outside of that. But all I'm looking for is the full URL for what's going on here, and I'm going to pass it in as the URI, and then we're going to pass in the auth as something else. Okay, so if you look at this whole syntax here, it says that MongoDB, this is the URL, it's where it's located, the port that it's located, and then what the database name is. Okay, so I'm going to save that there. I'm going to use the Mongoose Connect method, and in that Mongoose Connect method, I'm going to tell it where the URL is, which is going to be the URI, and then I'm going to pass in a config object here, which is going to say use new URL parser, and I'm going to set that to true, and then I'm actually going to pass in an auth object here, which is going to pass in user, which is going to be developer X, which is what I created, and then the password of what I created earlier. And I'm going to make sure I blur this out so you guys can't see it, but I'm going to run it through here. Okay, paste that in. So now that's connected there. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make another const called DB, and I'm going to make that mongoose .connection. Okay, and once I make the mongoose .connection, I'm going to look for I'm going to listen for an error, and if that error happens, I want it to console.log. We have an error connecting to the DB, and if that works, so what's happening here is it's going to listen for that connection, and if there's a connection error on the Mongoose connection to the mlabs database we've connected, it's going to alert me by saying, hey, we have an error connected to the DB. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do DB once, which is only going to run it one time, which is only going to run at one time. Which is only going to run at one time here, and we're going to use this on open, so meaning when it has successfully connected, we're going to run this on running it. So we have console.log, and here we're going to write we have successfully connected to the MLabs database. Okay, cool, and we're all good to go here. Okay, so here's the example again. So let's just run through this. It's the Mongoose. We're grabbing Mongoose. We're going to create the URL that's coming from our MLabs. We just copy and paste it directly there. We're going to use the Mongoose Connect method. We're going to pass in these credentials, the URI first, the use new URL parser. We're going to use the auth, which is going to be the username and password, and then we're going to set it up. Then we're going to create something called a DB connection, Mongoose.db connection, which is then going to listen for either an error or an open. My dogs are fighting in the background. Crazy. Or the database connection once, okay? And it's going to listen for once it's open, once we have successfully connected to the database, and if there's an error, it's going to tell us we have an error connected to the database, okay? So I'm going to bring that in. I've already required it inside my database, and now I'm going to work on my auth controller to kind of get going here. So we have two API endpoints. We have one for the API, we have one for the auth, and all I need to get set up for the auth controller here is just get the basic setup going, right? So all I'm going to do here in the auth controller is I'm going to bring express in, right, which is going to require express, and after that I'm going to do const router, which is going to equal express.router, and that's it. So, oh man, there's some noise going on in the background, which is crazy. So inside here, all I'm going to do is create that, and then I'm going to just export module.exports equals the router. Just typical router file, what you see, okay? In between there, we're going to do something crazy small. We're going to get set up with some routes here. We're going to get set up with our current routes, so we're just going to do router.get, router.get/me, and we're going to pass in the request/response, and we're going to do response.send or .status.200.send I am working. Now I think this is the basics that what we need to get our server up and running and to see if we've connected to our database server. So all I'm going to bring in here at this point is I'm going to go to my terminal line here, and I'm just going to hit nodemon server.js, and we got, okay, so now we got a couple of things. Our server is running on port 3333, and we have successfully connected to the MLabs database. Awesome. Now we're all connected. We got MLabs going. That means we have a MongoDB connected to MLabs, and we have our server up and running for us to kind of mess with. And for us to do that, I'm going to use a new plugin called, actually let's go look for a new plugin to start doing data API requests, or just requests from our server. So let's go to our plugins, which is going to be this extensions column, and let's do RESTful API or something. Nope, that's not it. API elements. Let's see if we have a REST API. Let's see what this is. So all we have to do is hit the REST API, auto start true. This example here. What does this do? I don't know. I just want to call API endpoints here. So let's just go use Postmon. So I'm bringing Postmon into the picture right now, and in this Postmon we know we have HTTP //localhost 3333, and we have something called API, and if it works, it says the API works, and then we have something called API auth/me. Okay, and I am working, so that's both of those things. So now we know our API is up and running, it's connected, everything's good. So I'm going to move this back to the side, and I'm going to get started with the rest of it. Okay, so let's get back to our code. So let's talk about everything that we've already accomplished here. We've already created a route, we've already created an auth controller, we've got it connected to our app.js, we created a server.js file, and we're going to start building out these routes, and we're going to start building out a JWT Authentication token. So the first thing I want to do is I am going to create a router.post, and this is going to be for us to register our users. We're going to grab a rec and a response. and that rec and response is going to bring here, okay? And so next thing we need to bring in is we know about a post is we need a body parser to come in so we have access to the request.body. So we're going to do const body parser is equal to require body parser, and then we're going to get that set up ready to go by using some middleware, which is like router.use body parser.url encoded, and we're going to pass in the extended as false, and then and then we're also going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it with .json here, okay? So now all this is doing is just enabling us, I'm going to leave some code here, enabling us to use rec.body, okay? Awesome. Here we're going to be doing a post, so this is what's going to be here is we're just going to register a new user, and we're going to go into the post section, okay? Now, in this post, we know a couple of things. We're going to break down, we know we're going to need a name. We're going to need a name, an email, and a password. Okay, those are the three things that we know we're going to need. We're also going to need to hash our password. We're going to need to create a user. And then we're going to need to return a token with the user. Return a token with the token in it so we can save that after the user is registered, okay? And if not, we got to return an error, okay? Return a failure, return an error. Awesome. Okay, so I know when I do a post request here, I know I'm going to need something. So I'm going to do const name, email, and password, which is then coming from the rec.body, and I know I can do a console.log name, email, password, and so we can see it. Okay, so I'm gonna bring up Postmon, and I'm gonna bring this up to my computer, and I'm gonna do a post request to register. And if we do this right, we should be able to see. I'm going to go to raw, I'm going to go to application.json, and I'm going to pass in some a name, which is going to be developer X, and I'm going to type in a password, which is going to be test, and I'm going to put in an email, which is going to be test@developerx.io. Okay, and if I send that through, we're not going to see a response back or anything, but we should see something if I move this. Hey, cancel. If I move this and actually show, come on, there it is. If I move this, you should see it down here logged inside our server because we're just console logging it at this point. I guess a better way of actually testing it is doing a res.status.200, and we're going to do send object with name, email, and password. So this way you can see all three of them responding via Postman and see that it works. Okay, so I'm going to do that again. Hit send, and there it is. We have our name, email, and password passed back through. Okay, so now we have our, I'm grabbing the wrong section. That's fine. Okay, now we have everything there, and at least we know we got our name, email, and password through. So the next thing I want to really want to accomplish here is that I want to hash the password. We're going to use bcrypt to do hashing, but we want to hash this password so it's not just a plain text password that we're saving in our database. We want to save this password to be something that can't be decrypted very easily. So we're using the bcrypt algorithm, and we're going to use that to actually hash our password, to take a plain text string password and turn it into a hash string. Okay, so what we're going to need with that is we're going to need to bring in our first dependency of bcrypt, right? So bcrypt, which equals require, and we're going to bring that in recrypt.js, and I'm going to use right here on this guy, right before this password. Hey guys, hey, don't fight, no more, no fighting. All right. So right below this guy, after we finished up step 1, so we got the email, password, everything in there. Next thing we're going to do is hash our password. So I'm going to keep moving this down as we continue to go along. So I'm going to create a let called hash password, and what that's going to do is it's going to use bcrypt, and that's going to use the hash sync method, and we're going to pass in the password, and we're going to give it a value of 8. Okay. Now, what I'm going to show you at this point is I'm going to call this method, but when I send this back, I'm going to send back the hash password, so that way we can see that the password has been hashed. Okay. So I'm going to save this. I'm passing that through. Same example. I'm going to use this. So I'm just going to do this on the side so you can see. I'm going to hit register, and you'll see send, and oh, you can't see it here. Okay, awesome. So let me actually bring this over here. On this side, you'll see that I'm going to hit the send button again, and I got a hash password being hashed every single time, okay? And that's the hash password, all right? So you can see that it's actually hashing the password from what it is to hashing it to being a password itself, for the password itself, okay? We'll continue going on with this example here. Now, I got the hash password set up. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to create a user. So in order for us to create a user, we're going to use Mongoose to create a model, or to create a schema, and that schema is then going to export a user model, and that user model is then going to be used to basically be our ORM into our MLabs DB. So I know we're using Postgres for majority of our work, but I'm just going to use Mongo because it's easy to set up, and we already got our MLabs MongoDB connected. So I'm going to create something really quickly to do just be our user model real quick. Okay, nothing you guys have to follow along with. You guys can use different models for use. You guys can use your user or your connects options, but this is how we're going to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in const mongoose, which equals require mongoose. And from there, I'm going to do const user schema, which equals new mongoose. Oh no, I can't spell. Dot schema, and I'm going to pass in what I need it to be. So it's going to be a name, and it's going to be a type string. Okay, and after the name string, it's going to be an email saying that it needs all three of these of type string, and I need a password that's also going to be of, guess what? You guessed it, type string. Okay, now in order for this to get this to work, I need to let it know that it's a mongoose model. So mongoose dot model is equal to user dot user schema, and I need to pass that. I need module dot exports that exports. It equals mongoose dot model user. Okay. Cool, awesome. So now we got this quick little user model we use connected with Mongoose that we can use and bring into our auth controller because we're going to be creating users here. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import our user model. So I'm going to call it const user, which equals require, and we're going to go up a directory into our user and grab our user model that we just created. Awesome, now we're in the same page here. So after we have our user model, everything's still successfully connected, our server's still running, we still have this register button here, and we're going to create a way to create our user. So after we got this hash password in place, we're going to do user.create, and I know we're not getting into authentication or JWTs yet, but we're almost there. We're going to pass the name, email, and hash or password, but as the hash password. Okay. So that's all we need to do. Then we're going to do a .then. It's going to take the user, and that user is then going to be created by what we're going to do here is we're going to do const. Now here's the first time we're going to introduce. Well, let's just do a response.status.200, and we're going to send the user. Okay, the new registered user, and then we're going to delete some as we get back into this. Okay, we're going to return there. Just so we can see it, and we're going to also toss in a catch, which is going to be an error, and that's going to be a res.status.500 and .send error.message. Okay, just so we can check if this is working or not. Okay, so we're going to try to get this comment back on top, so create the user, and we're going to see if this is working. So we still got everything running successfully. I'm going to create this. I'm going to send this user back and forth using Postmon so you can see it. And if we do it correctly, we should be getting a user object sent back. So here we go. And look, we got a user object sent back. We got a ID, the name, the email, and the password, that my hash password is set up. So this is already being saved and persisted into my MongoDB layer. Now I'm going to take this back and I'm going to continue going down this path of what we're going to do. So at this point, we're going to introduce the JWT. So once we create a user, we want to create a token that's going to create this user for us, right? Then we're going to grab this user information or send back a token with this authorized user, okay? So what that means, let's go, well, I want to show you guys the MLabs. Oh, where'd I go with MLabs? So in MLabs, if I go to collections and I hit the refresh button for this guy, you should see that I have a users collection and I have one user based inside this. Now you'll have a users table with one user inside that user that we just created using our layer of code, okay? So now we're going to kind of get into our JSON Web Tokens, right? So JWT. So after we got our bcrypt in, we're going to bring JWT in, which equals require JSON Web Token. And after we're saying, hey, after our user's been created, so after it's been created, successfully been created, I want to create a JSON Web Token, right? So I'm going to call it let token, and I'm going to do that as JWT.sign, and JWT.sign is what's going to sign it with, okay? And inside here, we're going to give it the ID of the user ID, which just got passed back from the user that just got created. And I'm going to then set up with a config.secret, which we haven't set up yet, which we'll have to bring in. And I also want to give it some configurations here, which expires. So we're telling it when this expires in, 84,600, which is 24 hours. Okay, and that's what we're going to do here. And then after that, we're going to send this back that authorization is true. So we're going to get back this here. We're going to, instead of sending back the user, we're going to send back auth is true, and the token is the token. And so that should be sending back the token. So at this point, there's something that we're missing here, which is the config.secret, right? We created a config file, but we didn't create anything to tell it how to use that config secret. So it's basically going to create a token based off of this object that we send through, and then it's going to salt it with something called like the config secret. It's going to use that as the secret password to decrypt the messages, and then it's going to give it an expiration date of that token. So that this token specifically expires in 24 hours. Okay. So let's go into our config file. We're going to do a module.exports, and this is just going to be a simple object, and this is going to call it secret, and this is going to be something super secret. Okay, awesome. That's all we need for this file. Okay, then we're going to go back in our auth controller. This is all going to work. This is all going to work, and we'll see this. So now at this point, all I need to do here is I need to send in a username and password, and I should be getting a user token sent back to me. So we just created our first JWT. Hey, stop it, guys. No. So we just created our first JWT token. Sorry, my dogs are going a little crazy. So here it is. So let's go check out Postmon. Let's bring that in, and here we're going to go back into our subscribe method. It says config is not defined. What do you mean config is not defined? Okay, let's go check out our code. So we have this config here, but we didn't actually bring it in. So let's do const config, which equals require config. Missed the G, and voila. So let's go back into Postmon and let's send this in, and guess what? We got our auth and I got our token set up back here. So this is our token right here. Now, I want to make sure this token works, and I want to make sure it's working great, okay? And so for us to do that, I'm going to then bring up our auth token here, and I'm going to keep setting up our me right here. So we've already got a way to register our user. We've created a token. So usually what you do with these tokens, you'll either save it in local storage or put it in a cookie, but you'll use that token. We generated our token using that username and password from the user created, okay? And then we also set an expiration date for 24 hours from now, okay? And I'll show you what I mean for that. So let's continue going into our tutorial here, and let's continue building out the .me so we can actually utilize it, so we can see who it is, what we're doing with it, and making it all work, okay? So, instead of doing this, we're going to create a const called token here, and we're going to look for something in the request headers. The request headers is something that we send over to our server, and it's going to be paying attention to a certain key field that we're going to attach our token into, so we can grab our token from that headers field and place it into, and actually just test it, right? So, and it's going to come in the request, and it's going to be in the headers, and we're going to pass it in as x.access token. Okay, so we got to place x.access token in our headers in Postman in order for us to continue accessing this. So if there is no token, okay, we're going to then return a res.status of 500, 401 that's not authorized, and we're going to send auth false, and message is set to no token provided. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Okay, the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to check if that token that we have sent over is actually verified. So we're going to use another JWT method called verify, and that verify method is going to grab a couple of things. Okay, it's going to take a few arguments. First off, it's going to take the token. Okay, what we set up. Then it's going to take in the actual secret key that we set up so it can decrypt it. So we can send that secret into. And then it takes a callback function, which takes an error and a decoded field, which decodes what we sent over that's been encoded initially when we registered it. So when we register it, we encoded this ID of user ID. Okay, so that's what we encoded here. So the only thing that's really saved is a object with a user ID inside it. Okay, so at this point we're going to check if there is an error. If there is an error, what we want to do is we want to return res.status. Res.status. Sorry, I can't see here. I'm falling a little behind, and we're going to do this as 401, and we're going to send this as actually no, we're here at this point we're going to do 500. Well, it's actually internal server error, but we can figure out something else, but we're going to use that for right now. Then we're going to send the message back saying, hey, the auth is false, and the token and the message is going to be failed to authenticate the token. Okay, so this means that the token has failed to authenticate, meaning that it's not valid. It's not a valid token to use. It doesn't exist. It's not good. Okay. So at this point, we're going to fail to authenticate, and if that passes, if there is no error, we're going to do the res send. We're going to pass that into this, and we're going to pass in the decoded key. Okay, decoded. Okay. So let's give this a test out here. So we're going to save this. We're going to go back to Postman. We're going to see that we've created this token here. We're going to copy this token, copy that here. We're going to change this to a get. We're going to switch this to me, right? Because it's the URL endpoint we've created. Remember, we're going to pass in a key here called x access token, and then we're going to paste in that URL. Now, if we did this correctly, we should be getting something with an ID back, and there it is. That's the key that we stored in there, right? That's the same key that we stored inside of that initial encryption of the token. It also shows you the expiration date and the IAT, which I'm not even sure what that is, but maybe that's the one that initialized the token, and this is the one that expires. Okay, and so right now we got the decoded value of this ID. Okay, so we can verify that it's been decoding and it's working, right? So now we've created this token, but let me show you something really cool about it. So let's say we've created a token. I'm going to create a new token. I'm going to since right now we don't have anything in place to mess up or to stop us from saving it, I'm going to save this new token right here for 10 seconds, for 10 milliseconds. So it's going to basically expire as soon as I place this in there. Okay. So I'm going to go back into here. I'm going to register. I'm going to then go hit post. I'm going to disable my access token. I'm going to the body to make sure it's still there, and I'm going to hit send. You should get that token right there. And then I'm going to copy this token, go back to me, and do a get request here, And in the headers, I'm going to replace that. I'm going to enable that first, and replace this with a new token that I've created. And you'll see that I can't because my token has failed to authenticate the token. So my token has been expired, and it's not able to verify that my token is valid because it has expired using the JWT verify function. So when you create a token, it's very important for you to create that expiration function, or that expiration time, because you can invalidate the token by that time by using the JWT verify. So just by using this quick thing. So I'm changing it back to 84600, save that back out, and I'm going to continue building out the .me, or the me sign. Okay, you know, at this point it looks like our me has been completed, and I don't want to continue moving forward with this, so I'm going to create another quick thing for login. Okay, so router.get, or let's do, router.post/login, and here we're going to do a request/response, and it's also going to collect information here. We immediately know that we need to collect some information called email and password, right? And that's going to equal from rec body, and I need to be able to find a user based on an email, right? So I'm going to use the user.find1, right? And I'm going to pass in the email, and in that email I'm going to then once it resolves that, it's going to send a user back, but if there's no user, I want to send an error message, so return res.status.404.send no user found. Okay, so what this means is that I went into my database, I'm looking for a user by the email, and then if that user, and then I'm going to research that user. If there's no user that's returned, that means I don't have that user inside my database. Okay, if I don't have that, if I do have a user return, the next thing I want to do is I want to, let's actually comment this. So check if user exists in my database. Okay, the next thing I want to do is check if the passwords are valid. Okay, so I'm going to create a quick variable, a quitlet, and I'm going to call that valid is valid. And you know, let's do is password valid because it makes it a little bit more descriptive. And we're going to use a bcrypt function called compare sync, and we're going to pass in the password that we've typed in and compare that to the user.password that has been brought in from the user object that we saved. Okay. Now we're going to check if is password valid. If it isn't valid, so if it's not valid, we're going to return res.status.401.send, and we're going to pass in that auth is false and token is null, and message is we're not going to leave a message. That actually opens up doors for someone to brute force your application if they know your password is incorrect. So okay, at this point, we've already done some of our validation, some of our checking. This is going to check if the passwords are valid. If it is passed, if it's not valid, it's going to return the response status of 401 and return back something that says auth false and token null. Now, at this point, we can make the assumption that passwords are good, that we found a user, and the password is validated. So at this point, we want to create an actual token, right? So now we can create something called let token, and what that's going to do is it's going to do the same thing. We're going to use JWT .sign, and inside there we're going to pass in the ID, and we're going to pass in the user _ID. Okay, and we're going to pass that into the config.secret, and we're going to bring that in with the expires in 8400, 84600. Okay. Now, so all we did is, once again, we went in, took out the email and password from the rec body. We're looking for the user with the email that they typed in. We're then looking if there's no user return. If not, we send a 404. And then we choose the password comparison using the compare sync on bcrypt. We check if the password isn't valid, we send it a 401 and not authorize it and delete the token. And then we use the JW. If it is valid, that means the user exists, the password's valid. We're going to do a JWT sign, and we're going to introduce the ID and basically encode this ID using the config secret and giving an expiration date. At this point, we can say, hey, this is all true. User is logged in, so this is user is logged in, and we need to return the res.status of 200, and we're going to send it with an auth of true and the token. So now it should be sending back the token here. Okay, so that should be the login here. Now that should be, now real quick, since we usually save tokens inside the URL or inside either a local storage or a cookie, I'm going to create a quick logout function so we can call it, and all this is going to do is take a res.request, and this is just going to res.status. It's just going to return the res.status of 200, and it's just going to send over an object that says auth of false and token of null. So at this point, all this is going to do is tell you and inform your application, hey, delete it from local storage, delete the cookie with this token installed with it, and get going with there. So delete token from local storage or cookie. Okay. All right. So now we have a login method, and let's test this login method. Okay. So we're posting the login, we're looking for email and password, and we can quickly find that using our guy here, right? So we're going to do auth.login, and I'm going to see the body here. So I'm going to first test to see if this works, and I'm going to hit send. Oh, we got an error, we can't get, so we don't have a get to post. It says authorization false. No, we don't have that. If we get rid of the password field and make it actual real, and we add in a wrong email, try that. It says the user not found. Now, if we do this all correctly, you'll see that I have an auth is true, and here's the token. So you can see that there's some authentication that we built in there and some validation we put in place to make this work for authorization, okay, or to authenticate your user to get into our application, okay, using a JWT. So now we have that set up in place, we have that set up in place, and we're getting everything kind of squared away. So here at this point, I want to introduce something called a, what do we call this? Middleware, right? So we have something called middleware that, as you can see, that we have a lot of, there might be a lot of places where we want to check out if the token is actually created or the actual token is valid. And if it's not valid, we want to send back an error. But if it is valid, we want to continue going forward with our application itself, right? So we're going to create something called verified token, and that's where we create this. It's the middleware, right? So inside this middleware, we're gonna do this. We're gonna grab the JWT, and we're going to require JSON Web Token. And inside this JSON Web Token, we're also going to bring in our config, and that's going to be equal to require our config object. And here we're going to do const.verify token, which equals to rec response and next. And here we're going to do a let token is equal to rec.headers, and we're going to pass that into x access token, and we're going to close that off. And if there is no token, we're going to return a res.status of 403, and we're going to send that the auth is false and the token, the message is no, I can't type, is no token provided. So that way it'll fail out and send that over. Okay, but if it is there, the next thing I want to do, if there's a token provided, so let's actually break this down. So we'll do this: check grab token from headers. No, we spelled that wrong. Headers. Okay. If this one's, we're gonna set here, we're gonna say check if token exists. Okay, and then next we're gonna do is we're gonna verify, we're gonna validate, or /verify the token. So here we're going to do JWT, and we're going to use the verify method we used earlier. We're going to pass in the token, we're going to pass in our config.secret, and then we're going to pass in the callback of error and decoded. Okay, and we're going to pass that through, and we're going to check here if there is an error, right? What we're going to do is we're going to return a res.status of 500 and .send that the auth is false and that the message is failed to authenticate the token. Okay, hey boys. Failed to authenticate the token. So if there is an error, that's what we're going to send back. But if there isn't an error, we're going to set the rec.user ID equal to the decoded ID and then we're going to set next. Okay, so now it's going to send this over to the next one. But last but not least, we need to module.exports this to verify token, and then we're going to set the save that way. Okay, so now we've created this middleware that we're going to run in between everything that needs the this check, and we're going to grab that user at the end of it. Okay, so inside here, all we're doing is we're going to look for the token inside the request headers. If there is no request headers, we're going to send this auth and no token provided. Then we're going to validate the token and make sure everything's good. If there is an error, we're going to send back with failed to authenticate the token. But if not, we're going to save the user ID in the request. So before we pass that on, we're going to save it to the user ID. It's going to be the decoded. Oh, I put decided. No, it's decoded ID. So it's always very good for you to review your code before you push it up. So you're going to look at the decoded ID, and then we're going to pass that to the next function that comes out. So we can send this out to the next method to be called inside the Express server. So here it allows us to do a lot of major refactoring, okay, and especially inside our me function. So we're no longer needing to check to do any of these things, right? So we can completely delete this, okay? So this is gone. So we've already got the request header set up there. So first off, we need to, before we get rid of that though, we have to bring it in. So let's bring in the middleware. And that's going to be const verify token, which equals require /verify token. And we're going to use that right here, verify token. And then we're going to also add in the next method here. Okay, just like so. Now, if everything works correctly, it should, which it still should, it's going to verify the token before it even gets inside here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to clean this up a bit, okay? We're going to clean this up a bit. So we're going to delete all of this, and we're going to use the user, and we're going to do find by ID. And since remember how we passed it in as the rec.user ID, we're going to type in rec.user ID, which is the decoded version after the token has been verified using JWT verify. And then we're going to tell it to bring a password of 0, which all this does is it tells it not to return the password. So we shouldn't be returning the password because that's going to show the user's password on this route if I do the /me. And then I'm going to get the user, and if that user comes back, I'm going to check if there is no user. If there isn't no user, I'm going to return a status res.status is equal to 404, which means that there is no user found. And if there is the user, then I'm going to do a res.send, return a res.status of 200, and then I'm going to pass in the user, okay? And then I'm also going to do a catch, just in case something goes wrong. I'm going to do the error, and if that error comes out, we're going to do res.status of 500, and we're going to do .send of there was a problem finding the user. Okay, so now we did everything correctly. We have done so many different things here, but now let's test this out. Okay, so I'm going to go into my mlabs database, and I'm going to delete everything that we've created so far on the users table. So I'm just going to delete everything that we have so we can start fresh. So here we go, here we go, here we go, and here we go. So we no longer have nothing in the users document, so nothing in the user collection. I'm going to go back and open up my application again. and I am then going to open up Postman, and I am going to actually register a user, and I'm going to show you on this side page. So I'm going to register a user. Okay, I'm going to authenticate this user, and I have this guy right here. So first thing I want to show you is that our middleware is already working because we already have this header here. But if I were to do a get.me and I pass in that token, it says fail to authenticate that token. Okay, it doesn't exist. It's a fail. Okay, if I pass in this example and I put that in there and I do it, you'll see that I get my user information back without the password attached. So we know that our verify token middleware is now working on the /me route. Okay. Now if I remove this token and I change it by any other way, I can send it in. It says failed to authenticate token, so it doesn't work. So I can put that back in, and it does work by getting that GET request and bringing the right user into our application. So that is kind of JWTs in a nutshell on how we accomplished all of this. So let's kind of go through our code one last time to figure out what we did and figure out what's going on. Okay, so returns, let me just put this in, returns the user here. Okay, so in this point, onto this point, so let's start from the very beginning. Okay, so we've created a quick example of how to do JWTs using JSON Web Token, Express, and Mongo. And we're going to start from the very beginning. So the first thing that we did is we installed the packages that we needed for our application to run. So we used bcrypt, we used body parser, Express, JSON Web Token, and Mongoose. Okay. After we did that, we set up our app.js file. Inside our app.js file, we grabbed Express, which requires Express. We created an app with Express, then we required our DB. We then included our auth controller. We created 2 API endpoints, one API for us to test that the server was working, and then we used middleware using the auth controller, then we exported our module. After that, we set up our database. Our database contained MongoDB. We created an mlabs MongoDB. Here's the example. We set up using the connect function. We set up using new URL and auth, the user and password. We then did a DB connect to make sure that our Mongoose connection was verified and open and connecting. So this will be called on error. So every time it has that once, it'll return a error. Every time there's an error, it'll return that console log. Every time there's once an error, it'll actually do successfully connected to mlabs, which is what you see down here inside our console. From there, we then created our server. Our server just imports the app. It sets up the port, and then it actually does a listen, so it starts the port working that way. And then we created our config object, which is just a module export, which is something that says secret, and our something super secret that we'll pass in for all of our bcrypting and JWT token signings. Okay. From there, we created a user model, which our user model was created by using Mongoose. We defined what our user schema was going to look like, which is going to have a name, an email, and password. And then we created a Mongoose model around it using the user schema, and then we exported the Mongoose model of users. Here in the auth controller, we brought in everything that we needed to make our auth controller work. So we brought in Express, we created a router using Express router, we brought in body parser, we brought in bcrypt, we brought in JWT, our config object, and then our user model. We also created middleware called verify token, and then we enabled body parser. After we enabled body parser, we created a route called router.get with the endpoint of /me. We created a post route of register, and we created a login route, and it looks like we also created a log out route. Now, inside this me function, all we're doing is we're running it through the verify token middleware. And if we look at the verify token middleware, all this is doing is it's grabbing the token, it's checking if it exists. If it doesn't exist, it gives you a 4 or 3, and then it verifies the token before pushing on to the next one. The biggest thing to take away from this is that our rec.user ID is going to be the decoded ID coming back from what we encoded from the JWT initially. My dog's eating back there. Okay. If we go back to the router, we do a post here. and our post is on register. We're going to break down the rec.body. We're going to hash our password. Then we're going to create the user with the hash password. Then we're going to, after the user's been created, we're going to then create a token using the user ID coming back from the user created with our config secret instead of expiration date. And then we're going to send that back to the front end to get it. And if there's an error, we're going to put this back up. And if there's an error, we're going to send back that error message, right? We're going to return that error message. Okay. We also created a login, which grabs the email and password from the rec body. That's going to go find one with an email. If the user does exist, it'll return. If the user doesn't exist, we'll return a 404 and user not found. Then we'll validate the passwords using the bcrypt compare sync. After we do that, we'll do if this password valid. If it's not valid, we'll send an auth false and a token of null. If it is valid, we're going to create a new J token and send that back through to the front end. And we created a quick login route. So this is JWT authorization and authentication in a nutshell. And so I hope that you guys learned something from this today, and hopefully I'll upload this and everything's good. Cool. Thanks for watching. See you later.